everyone, welcome back to the Change Your Mind podcast. I'm your host, Kris Ashley. I'm super stoked for my guest today because he's actually one of my good friends. We're going to talk all about functional medicine. But first, couple quick announcements. Head down to the links in the show notes to check out my book, Change Your Mind to Change Your Reality. Check out my free workshop that I do about once a week, sometimes a little less often. I have courses. I have free giveaways on my website, lots of ways to get in touch with me. And also, this podcast is part of a podcast network owned by the Los Angeles Tribune. So check out what we're doing. We've got a lot of really cool stuff in the personal development realm coming up. Hi, I'm Kris. When I was younger, I went through trauma that caused me to feel broken and lost. But my life changed after I had a spiritual awakening. Since then, I've dedicated my life to studying and learning from masters all around the world that have helped me to create a life of fulfillment and abundance beyond my wildest dreams. Now I'm dedicated to sharing everything I've learned so that you don't have to suffer for decades like I did. I've seen people's lives completely transform, and I share it all right here. So I am so excited to have Dr. Taylor Krick with me. And it's funny because, like I said, you're my best friend's husband. We'll just throw that out there. So I'm not used to calling you doctor, but I'm going to read your bio so everyone knows a little bit more about you.
Okay.
So Dr. Taylor is the host of the Autoimmune Doc podcast and owner of the Washington Wellness Center, which is a functional wellness clinic. He works with patients locally as well as virtually all across the United States and the world, which is so cool because I live in California. He lives in Illinois. I call him up all the time. He orders me labs. We can jump on Zoom. It's super easy to see him across the country. So he received his doctorate from Palmer College of Chiropractic. He was a chiropractor for a while. I think still practicing a little bit, maybe.
I mean, yeah, that's what my doctorate is, but I don't do any adjustments.
Okay, well, unless your friends force you to, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, my parents ask me all the time. My wife, my kids, and yeah. I don't do zero, but it's just not part of my business.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's still your credentials, so it's good to mention.
For sure.
Okay. So after graduating from Palmer, Dr. Taylor and his wife, Jamie, moved to Salt Lake City to open their first wellness clinic, which was Align, Utah. And during the almost 6 years he owned Align, he provided care for professional skiers, national championship weightlifters, and helped thousands of people take control of their health, including patients losing hundreds of pounds, getting off dozens of medications, reversing chronic diseases like diabetes, chronic fatigue syndrome, heart failure, thyroid disease, so much more. And then eventually they ended up moving home to Illinois. He opened the Washington Wellness Center, and they've just been helping people all around the country since. So welcome, Taylor.
Thank you, Kris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's fun. And I've said this to you and our other friends so many times, but it's been so amazing to watch my friends grow on these parallel trajectories to my own, right? Like all of us in our friends group have pursued helping people in some aspect, right? Some of our friends are therapists. You're doing the functional medicine thing. I'm doing the coaching thing and the yoga thing. And it's like, we're all, I don't know. It's just been so cool to watch us all grow in a similar way because it's so easy to watch friends grow apart, right?
Yeah. It's been super fun.
Yeah. And I'm so proud of you and all that you're doing there. So I love to start off my shows with asking what people's origin stories are. And, like I just told people, you started off doing chiropractic, pivoted to functional medicine. I'd love to hear what that journey was like for you. What made you want to go down this path?
Sure. So let me even back up before that there's no reason why I went to chiropractic school. My best friend was going, and his uncles were chiropractors. So he wanted to be a chiropractor since he was like a little kid. But for me, I had never been to a chiropractor, never been adjusted. But my undergrad was in exercise physiology and sports medicine, so it kind of matched up, and I was looking for what am I going to do next, and he said you should consider chiropractic. So I considered that a godsend, that I just like had no real draw to that. I was just like, yeah, I'll go. And I remember I went and shadowed one chiropractor. It was like my grandma's chiropractor, and she was like 80 at the time probably, and he saw like 5 people in a day, and I was like, oh, this is what chiropractic is, cool. And it was nothing like my practice. But then I opened my practice, and so in chiropractic, the whole goal is get sick people well. So you just think of like, hey, how can we get sick people well? And you learn a lot about like the failures of the medical system, because there's a lot of like us and them and with chiropractors because they've been really, slandered by conventional medicine and things like that too. But you learn all about the downsides of what's out there for people. And it's like, man, this is really sucking. Like, we are really bad, like statistically, not opinion wise. Statistically, we're really, really bad at getting sick people well. In fact, it's almost non-existent. And then there's like these alternative things that can be done. So anyway, I opened up my first clinic, and I was chiropractic, but I also did mindset. There was 5 essentials. It was mindset, nutrition, spine and nervous system, exercise, and detox. So it was like we were already fairly functionally minded of looking at all these areas and taking supplements and diet and exercise and things like that. But as I evolved in practice, like the things that, I don't know, keep you up at night are the people that don't get well. You see, we still have a YouTube channel full of testimonials of like all these crazy stories of healing, but it's like those are cool. But the people that don't get well, it's like, dang it, like why was I not able to help them? Or why is this person like coming into me and they're like, I've been to 15 specialists, nobody can help me, blah blah blah. And they're not asking me to necessarily help them, they're just telling me their health history. And it's like, man, something's got to be able to help this person. So you just start diving into that more. And so honestly, I just started diving into that. And before I even, diagnosed myself or anything with my own journey, I started becoming an expert on autoimmunity and just the immune system and the immune system attacking itself, and just started really studying the crap out of that. I mean, really, my best thing that I've done is like, I study like a lot. It's just like kind of my passion, and not like my hobby, and my passion also happens to be my profession. So like in my free time, I'm listening to things about functional wellness. I'm learning things. I would be skipping class in school to stay home and like listen to podcasts and stuff about this stuff, and just taking seminars and all kinds of information, and just start piecing that together. And you start working with people, start running labs, start putting them on protocols, and just before you know it, I'll fast forward, and now we're 12 years in, and I've worked with thousands of people across the country, across the globe, and it's like, wow, now I hate to ever say that I'm an expert, because it's like I always have a learning mentality and things like that. I'm always learning from mentors and learning from other people, and still going to and attending a lot of seminars, and now I'm starting to speak at them and stuff like that too. But it's just like, just continues to evolve, because it's crazy that like the education, this is the same for you, Kris, this is the same for anybody, but like, first you got to get the education that gives you at least a little bit of confidence to go out and try to help people. But then helping people gives you the education of being able to help more people, and gives you the confidence of being able to help more people. So a lot of the people that I see now, they're crazy, crazy complex. And they've seen 15 people. And so they're not asking me to be their primary care, to run their MRIs on their brains or anything like that. They're asking me for like, hey, what else can I do? Because this doesn't seem like it's working for me. And then we're looking at things like toxins, we're looking at things like hidden infections, we're looking at things like autoimmunity, and so on and so forth. And then as part of that too, I discovered autoimmune disease. First, I found it in my dad. So I was running labs on my dad, and he had Hashimoto's, and he feels fine. My dad's 68 next week, has not been to the doctor in like 40 years, has not taken a medication ever, has no complaints, doesn't get sick. He's a dentist, so he's exposed to tons of germs. He's got a really strong immune system. And he's just like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of guy. And he's also really smart with his health too. But found it in my dad first, and he was like, Hashimoto's. Like, I didn't really care that much. But then I found it in myself, and so, just again kind of poured fuel on this fire of autoimmune expertise. Is like, okay, I want to learn everything about it for myself and for my patients. And then that's really, and then my timeline is not exact here, of course, but at some point I started a podcast called the Autoimmune Doc podcast, and that started attracting autoimmune people from around the country and around the globe of like, hey, I've got this mystery autoimmune disease. They've told me I have it, but what in the heck do I do about it? And so a lot of people, they've been to neuro, they've been to gastro, they've been to rheumatoid, they've been to endocrine, they've been to all these different specialists and things like that. And then I just kind of help piece those things together of like, here's what you can do, here's what's right, here's what's wrong, here's what these things tell us, ask your doctor for this, etc. So I don't replace their doctor. I don't claim to or do any diagnosis or treatment. I just lead people. We were kind of talking about this off air. I just lead people to the things that are out there and available. Because even in today's world, there's like so much crap out there. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean there's so much stuff. And a lot of it is crap. But there's so much stuff that people are like, a lot of it, let's say there's 20 good things out there. There's 20 good diets. There's 50 good supplements. How do you know what's right for you and your situation and your symptoms at the time and things like that? So that's kind of what I do now, is help guide people through their autoimmune, or it's not always autoimmune, they're chronic and complex health conditions. So I was just even mentioning to you, Kris, that like my patient before this, or my client before this, he's 16. He's got a genetic disorder he was born with. It's a mitochondrial disorder. He has seizures all the time, and just all the complications that come with that, and all the medical visits and diagnoses and things that come with that. And they came to me because they're kind of intrigued about parasites. And so I'm not necessarily talking them out of that, but I'm like, okay, tell me why you think that, and tell me what was leading you towards that, and let me throw some things that I think about it. And I'll tell you, today too, we were going over his labs. They showed a bunch of stuff, but they showed like some yeast and mold issues. And the mom said, she's like, okay, we went to a birthday party and it smelled moldy when we walked in. And she's like, my son reacted and we had to leave. And she's like, I never noticed it before, but like he's definitely reactive to mold. So we're just starting that conversation. But I saw 4 people yesterday. I saw 6 total, but I saw 4 yesterday that were doing awesome. The other 2 just are just kind of newer. But 4 people that are just doing awesome. And 3 of them have done pretty serious mold remediation. So that's a major, major thing that I see. And also, while I'm rambling, I just uploaded my most recent podcast that I just uploaded is an interview with a pediatrician from Santa Barbara. And we're talking about mold and kids and ADHD, OCD, swollen tonsils, stomach pains, all those things. So that's a major, major thing. But that's what I help people walk through, is whatever's a piece of their journey, whether it be mold or Lyme or heavy metals or pesticides or whatever else, gut health, etc. But yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for giving your background and answering a few of my questions along the way. And I have so many questions based on things you said.
Yeah.
Because you touched on so many important things that I want to expand on. But I just, first of all, as someone who like went through unexplained infertility, I refuse to believe that things are unexplained.
For sure. Oh, 100%. And I would say too, Kris, we've briefly talked about this, but the first place that you lived in San Francisco and your dog was having seizures, that place was moldy. Yeah, exactly. So I don't even know. I mean, you agree, but it's like, and I'm not saying absolutes, but of course, just that sign or symptom points to that for me. And it's just like interesting. Yeah. But probably even places before and stuff. But yeah, I completely agree that nothing is idiopathic. Nothing is uncaused. And sometimes things are a mystery, but there's got to be a reason. There's got to be more explanation. And how many people go to their doctor and they're like, we don't know. And they're like, no, that just means that you don't know. That doesn't mean that nobody knows. And that doesn't mean that the answers aren't out there. And that doesn't mean that science doesn't know either. That just means that you don't know, doc.
Exactly. And I think that that's where Western medicine falls so short. Like Western medicine's amazing if you break your arm or, like you have to go to the hospital, but
I've been hit by a car. I've had a lot of Western medical emergency, broken bones.
But also for listeners, Taylor's also like the extreme sports guy that's like doing like backflips down the ski hill and like probably on like water skis too.
And I've very rarely gotten injured doing those things, but I got hit by a car on a bike and have had broken bones and different things like that. So it's like, stitch me up, put me back together, save my life too, if necessary. But what about if that's not necessary? That's what we're horrible at.
Yeah. And I love that you pointed out that you're constantly learning, and you and I have that in common. Like I'm in my free time, I'm reading books and I'm listening to podcasts and I'm like trying to further my knowledge in my own areas. And I know you're the same way. And I think that that's also where Western medicine doctors fall short, because they learn what they learn in medical school. They get like zero nutrition, right? Like zero training on the gut, essentially. And then, they're so busy or they're so controlled by the system that the pharmaceutical companies own, that they're not constantly learning.
Yeah.
And I love that you said it's all learning. Yeah.
And they make $400K a year, and they're like, why would I switch? You know, like there's no motivation is my point of like, the best thing is medical doctors that get sick, because then they got to go searching for the answers, and they're like, holy crap, like there's this whole world out there. Again, my interview with my pediatrician friend was interesting, because he was like, hey, mold wasn't on my radar 10 years ago. It all started with one patient who hadn't gotten well, and I started working with this mentor, and he's like, this is textbook mold. And he's like, really? That wasn't even on my radar. And he's like, no, this is textbook mold. And the person got well. And so like, you see that once or twice, but if it happens in your own life, then you take it really, really seriously, and you're like searching for answers. So yeah, I think that is, I don't want to say it's the best thing, but it's like those docs are seeking answers of why are the sick not getting well. And that's why, just in general, doctors are leaving the medical profession in droves, because it's control. Their time is controlled. Like, you can't spend more than 10 minutes with the patient, and like how much are their prescriptions, or like that's how they're measuring success. It's like, how many people are you seeing? How many prescriptions are you filling? Not how many sick people are getting well. It's not really results based. It's a business, and it's regulated in that way. And the hospital directors and things like that, it's big business, and hospitals go out of business all the time, and all those things. And it's a failing business too, I would say. But anyway, it's also runs our world.
Okay, so I want to take it a step back, and for listeners who are like totally lost, they're like, I don't know what functional medicine is. I've never heard of that. Can you just describe the difference between traditional Western medicine and functional medicine? So just give us like the bare bones definition, so people can have like some baseline understanding.
Yeah, and I'll keep going. I'm not going to keep talking about this, but again, I was talking about this pediatrician, and he was like, I don't care what the diagnosis is when people come to me. He's like, I look more at systems. What's going on with their gut system? What's going on with their endocrine system? What's going on with their neurologic system? The diagnosis is the basis of function, or of Western medicine. Like, if you have these conditions or these labs, it's like you get this diagnosis. And then this diagnosis is treated with this medication. And it's very algorithm based, but it's all about the diagnosis. But the diagnosis is not who you are, you know, and it's just a word that's put on to describe your symptoms. And so there's thousands now of different diagnostic codes and diagnoses that all basically say the same thing, that the person's body is not functioning well. But and if we want to go look for root cause, then we look at these systems like, okay, why? What's causing that? And I would say that is, again, the functional medicine approach is, it's like a growth-minded approach of like, how can I get better, and why am I not getting better? And I think that a lot of your listeners, I don't know, not even if they've never heard of functional medicine, the concept's probably not foreign to them, because people that listen to your podcast are growth-minded. That's like the purpose of your podcast. And that's also too with like my podcast, like the people that I attract are so great, because they're not like the conventional people that are like pizza and ice cream and beard their way into their problem. They're like high level people that are seeking answers, and they're like, I refuse to believe this. I had two people yesterday that one has MS and one has a bunch of other IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, and they were both like, I refuse to believe that this is my future. I refuse to believe that this diagnosis is, I rebuke this diagnosis, different things I were saying. I was like, yeah, because that's
because mindset's so important, right?
Exactly. And it's like, hey, and how many other people are like, no, I can't do that because I have MS. So it's like, you become your diagnosis, and it's like, I know MS people that could do anything. And so sometimes you could become that diagnosis and be like handicapped by it, or you can say, no, I don't believe in that handicap. What's wrong with me? Or why is my body demyelinating? Or why do I have lesions on my MRI? Or why do I have numbness or tingling, or whatever the case is? But you go and you look for the upstream root causes. And so I think that, even going back to your original question that I didn't answer very clearly, but functional medicine is like systems biology approach, looking for root causes.
Yeah, and I feel like that's so important to highlight, right? It's like treating the root cause versus treating the symptom.
Exactly. And when you do that, when you do that, the symptoms go away. So it's great, but we don't look for the symptoms. In fact, I'll often draw this for people. I do a ton of drawings for people, and I'm very visual, so I show a lot of studies and stuff. But we got short-term, middle-term, and long-term goals. And our long-term goal is to get to like maintenance. You know, maybe you take a vitamin D and fish oil and things like that for the rest of your life. But if you don't have any fires to put out, then great. But the short-term goals are the fires to put out, and that's the symptoms. The middle-term goals are the root causes, gut health, toxic burden, things like that. And they're middle-term goals because it's not going to last forever. You know, if you've got X number of toxins and you detoxify, well, eventually that number is going to come down. Or if you've got X number of candida or yeast or mold or things like that, eventually that's going to come down, and we can treat and reduce those things. So for a period of time, we're going to have to put some work in there, and then you're going to have fewer short-term goals because you're going to have less fires to put out. And then you can get to the long term, which is just like smooth sailing maintenance.
Yeah, that makes sense. So obviously what you teach and what you treat like encompasses so much. And you've kind of thrown out some words, and I want to dive into all of them. You've talked about mold, you've talked about gut health, you've talked about toxic burden. You know, are there some like specific like 4 or 5 pillars of functional medicine that you work with and will help people get into a healthy state when you treat those things?
Yes. So I'll have to think about the exact thing, but gut health that's like a foundational principle of all functional medicine. Is that like disease begins in the gut, and look to the gut first. And even like these books behind me, this is a textbook. It's called Food Associated Autoimmunities. And this is the other one with the food going in the mouth. It's called When Food Bites Back. And it's talking about food driving autoimmunity. So I think that gut, and it's not always foods either, but it's like foods and gut are the drivers of a lot of things. So there's a couple just big picture sayings that they say, a gut on fire equals a brain on fire. So even in anxiety, depression, OCD, autism, those things, it's like that's a foundational principle. It's like gut, 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 gut. And the literature and the research support that as well. And so gut is often a starting place. Now, gut health and toxins are basically the two foundational things to answer your question. They're like everything else kind of branches off of gut health and toxins, but gut is also an important detox mechanism too. So like I saw somebody today, she's 33 and she's a nurse and she has 1 or 2 bowel movements a week. So it's like, guess what? You're probably not detoxifying because you're not getting rid of those toxins. They're staying in your body a long time. So even if our root cause is toxic exposure, the gut is an important starting place even for the detoxification. And so that involves, within that category, there's a million other subcategories, but it's like, do you have overgrowth of bacteria? Do you have undergrowth of bacteria and you need probiotics? Do we need to pull weeds in your gut? Do we need to plant seeds in your gut? Do we need to heal leaky gut or gut permeability? Do you have candida or yeast in your gut? Very common. Do you have parasites? I mean, all those things are mega high on the radar for everybody. And that's where lab testing comes in too, of like, instead of trying to take a machine gun approach, like you're bound to hit something. But instead of that, we try to take a sniper approach and see like, okay, what do your labs show that you need? And then we go and aim at that. And then we can generally tell either by lab values or generally by the person's symptoms, we could tell if they're getting better. But I'd say that the two are gut health and detox. I would even say a lot of things that I see, Kris, they might not be gut symptoms. It might not be constipation, diarrhea, reflux, but still the gut is an important place to start. Even when I see hormone imbalances, even if I see brain things, it's gut and toxins, gut and toxins, gut and toxins. Airborne toxins have immediate access right to the brain. So if we're exposed to airborne toxins, like molds or heavy metals or pesticides especially, or pollution, even in air pollution, the major concern is heavy metals, where there's particulates too, but they just have immediate access up the olfactory nerve right to the brain. And then they jack up things like hormones or anxiety or fear sensing or temperature regulation or heart rate or whatever the case is. But gut health and toxins are the foundations. And that includes even, pathogens and things like Lyme. It's not necessarily always in the gut. It's not necessarily as toxic, but maybe gut health. But I also think that gut health and toxins is more foundational than pathogens like Lyme or Epstein-Barr virus, because gut health and toxins cause your body to not be able to fight those things. So gut health and toxins.
So how does someone's gut become out of balance? You mentioned a lot of things: overgrowth, undergrowth, yeast, parasites, all these things. Like, does this all come from diet? Like how do we get so out of
Yes, but
balance?
not all. I mean, I would say life.
Life. Yeah.
So life, yeah. So stop, that doesn't mean stop living, of course, um, but life, like meaning diet, stress, taking antibiotics in your past. For me, I was on a lot of antibiotics growing up. For other people, it might have been, hey, I was on birth control, or I was on this antidepressant for a period of time, or I ate a high sugar diet, or I drank a lot of alcohol, or again, those are all just life that are not necessarily, I'm not demonizing any one of those things, but life creeps up and the gut gets imbalanced. And I would say that even for my kids, just one of my focuses is just like, how do we keep their gut balanced? And it's not, again, that they don't eat any Halloween candy or things like that. We try to minimize that. And last night they traded in all their Halloween candy that is going to go on what we do is we trick them so they use it for their gingerbread houses. So like they get some Halloween candy for a week or 2 weeks, and then they have to trade it all in, and they get like very little anyway. But the point is that I give my kids things like probiotics or things that kill things in their gut, or we do stool testing, we do lab testing on them too, to just say, hey, how do we keep your gut balanced? Because it's one of those things that if it never gets off the rails, then it's never that bad. But if it gets way off the rails, then it's like, hey, this is going to take a lot of work to correct this. But toxins, pesticides, tap water, I'm not saying that's the sole cause, but there's toxins, there's hormones, all those things, or mold will jack up the microbiome for sure. So all those things will just disrupt the gut. And then our microbiome, which is basically what's living in your gut or what's living in your body. We're talking right now about the gut microbiome. There's 10 pounds of bacteria in different things in your microbiome, in your gut alone. In our bodies, we've got more bacterial DNA in our bodies than we've got human DNA. So we've got just so much interaction between ourself and these bacteria that are literally in our body that it's just driving a lot of our hormonal balance, inflammatory balance, immune balance, all those things. So it's just a really, really important foundational thing that science has discovered over the last, especially the last 25 years or so.
That's crazy. I didn't know there were 10 pounds of bacteria living inside of me.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So you briefly mentioned leaky gut too. Can you explain what that is? So
Sure.
and what causes it?
Well, life would be the answer because it's the same things we just talked about. But
Yeah.
let's say those bacteria get imbalanced. Those bacteria protect that gut barrier. So your gut is a barrier. Your body has barriers that are really, really important because they protect it from the outside world, right? It's like a fence around your yard or whatever it is. But we want that barrier to be permeable, but we want it to be selectively permeable. It's like your gate at your house. Like you want to let your friends in, but you don't want it to be open to everybody, or your front door. You might close your front door when you leave your house. You don't have to be open all the time, but you still want to be able to use it and come in and out. So that's the same with your gut. We want the good stuff to get in, vitamins, minerals, and nutrients, but not the bad stuff. When the gut gets inflamed, the gut is like all these cells, and they're held together with tight, and it's one cell layer, so it's incredibly thin. It's a lot thinner than your skin. Your skin's an average of 7 cells thick. Your thin gut lining, your epithelial lining is about 1 layer. And you can also too, leaky gut's very famous, but what's not as famous is leaky lung and leaky sinus. And to me, I'm huge on those because again, airborne toxins, but it's all the same. So as those gut cells get more permeable, then things can get in there. Everybody's gut is permeable to a degree. So they say, how do you know if you have a leaky gut? If you have a vowel in your name. But if your gut gets pathologically permeable, then that's when we get problems. That's like leaving your front door open every time you leave. It's like, hey, something's going to happen, whether it's a burglar or it's like a mountain lion comes in your door or something. Something bad's going to happen. So that's leaky gut. So then things like undigested food particles and other toxins and other things like LPS, which comes from bacterial cell walls, is just very, 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 very inflammatory. But they can get into the bloodstream and drive an immune response and inflammation, and that's considered the gateway to autoimmune diseases like Hashimoto's or MS or RA. So that's kind of linking back upstream of, let's say somebody comes in with MS or RA or Hashimoto's, we'll say, well, you probably have a leaky gut because that's the gateway to that. So we got to look at your gut, but long term, like what caused that? Well, some dysbiosis of the microbiome is associated with that leaky gut and driving your inflammatory autoimmune process. So looking at all of those pieces and kind of working our way backwards is our goal, even if those short-term, middle-term, and longer-term goals. But that's more leaky gut or intestinal permeability.
So does all autoimmune disease essentially come from the same thing, which is inflammation from this? And what makes one person develop MS versus one person develop Hashimoto's?
Genetics are certainly involved. Genetics plus environment.
Okay.
You know, if you are exposed to a bunch of airborne toxins, you're more likely to have brain issues than thyroid issues. But mold can drive both, but largely genetics, I would say. So there certainly are genetic components to autoimmune diseases and autoimmunity. But if you put somebody with good genes in a bad environment, they're going to develop problems. And if you put somebody with bad genes in a good environment, they might not develop problems. So the environment trumps the genetics, but as opposed like, why would one person develop one thing and another person develop another? It's probably a lot of maybe more genetics than the environment, but it's a combo of those two things. Now, what was your first question? There's another question that you asked. Do you remember?
Does all autoimmunity come from essentially the same thing?
Yes, but it comes from immune disruption. So, like, you could get a flu shot and develop autoimmunity. You get a flu, you get an influenza and develop autoimmunity. So, like, something came in and disrupted your immune system, and then it never resolved. The inflammation never resolved, and then your body begins to damage itself or begins to recognize itself as bad. So it doesn't all start exclusively from leaky gut, but in general, that's a widely accepted thing that all autoimmunity has that as a component. But sometimes there might be a different straw that broke the camel's back. Like, man, I went and traveled to China and ate undercooked pork or something and got really sick, and I've never been the same since. Or I went and stayed in my cousin's moldy house for a month, and like now I have autoimmunity 5 years later. So there could be different instigating triggers, but there's all these things as far as variables. There's really 5 big variables for autoimmunity. It's foods and gut health, toxins, stress, which stress alone won't cause it, but stress with these other things for sure will make everything worse. Hormone fluctuations. So puberty, pregnancy, perimenopause, very common times for things to flare, and hidden infections. So like Epstein-Barr virus, Lyme, other viral things, cytomegalovirus. But generally, even to me, we all have this pathogen burden. So, you know, you were talking about the 10 pounds of bacteria. We have 400 trillion viruses in our body. So, you know, and COVID was so wildly, of course, popular and famous and stuff like that. And it was obviously super bad, it's jacking people up. But there's 400 trillion viruses. They're like, let's worry about a lot of these others. Or let's say that somebody's got a high viral load. I'm not worried about one or the other because we get hyper-focused on like, I have Epstein-Barr virus or I have cytomegalovirus. It's like, that's important. But why? Why are they reactivating? Or if somebody's getting cold sores, why is that reactivating? What's allowing that to reactivate? Because many people have a high viral load. They're not always reactivating, especially with those herpetic viruses that lay dormant sometimes for years and then they reactivate with shingles or herpes or things like that, cold sores. But it's like, why is that reactivating more than why do I have this? Why is it reactivating?
That makes sense. And in that case, it's like I could totally see how stress would be a player. Right?
Exactly, 100%.
Stress jacks everything up.
Exactly, and shuts down the immune function and all the things with that. But yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting you brought up COVID, and I know, I mean, I can think of off the top of my head 3 people really close to me who COVID blew up things that like they didn't even know they had. Like just getting like Lyme. I know someone who had dormant Lyme and she had no idea she had it probably for decades. And she's just been suffering tremendously for 3 years now because COVID just blew it up.
And I would say too, and not to say anything about her case or anything, but even with what you just said about the 3 years, something's missing. And I would bet you $1 million it's mold, but obviously I'm biased to mold. I think everyone's got that point. But I see people that have spent a ton of time and a ton of money in the Lyme world, and I'm like, show me the mold. Or I see a ton of long COVID. So I see a ton of, I just spoke at a seminar in Denver last month on long COVID. It's one of my expertises, so I see a ton of it. But and again, not to, sometimes on a podcast, you say things more loosely to say it, but I'm not that biased with it. But it's in 9 out of 10 people, it's like there's mold. It's so unbelievably common, and COVID is the thing that came and jacked them up for sure. But people ask me all the time, they're like, "What caused this?" And I'm like, mold piled up the logs and poured a bunch of gas on them. COVID came and dropped a match on it, and now it's like, boom! Now you got a fire. But it's like it's not one or the other, because people get so hyper focused on COVID, and they join all these long COVID groups and become COVID victims and all the things. When it's like, no, you had this pre-existing, and just nobody's ever pointed that out to you. But when we sit down for 90 minutes, we talk through somebody's history, we talk through their labs, we're like, oh, you had all this stuff. You had all this stuff building beforehand. You had histamine issues, you had autoimmune issues, you had environmental exposures. You just didn't know it yet. But COVID's also known as the autoimmune virus, so that it triggers a ton of autoimmunity. And it's COVID, it's wild COVID, it's COVID vaccines. It does not matter. I see 50-50 both ways, but they both can jack up the immune system and mitochondria and cause things to, like you said, reactivate and reawaken. But if somebody's not getting better, that's like where my head goes is like, oh, I got some questions about that.
Yeah, totally. And that's all super fascinating, and it makes sense. And I like the log and the gasoline and the fire analogy. And I think it's important that you said the vaccines too. Like I'm thinking, I don't, HIPAA violations. I don't want to like talk too much about like specific cases, but like one of my husband's best friends, started seeing you, and he hasn't been able to leave his town and like go to higher elevation. And by the way, he lives 15 minutes from us. He can't come to our house. Since getting the COVID vaccine, he had like heart issues. He had heart surgery, and it's just crazy. And like you've been helping him, and you're the first person that out of like this long list of doctors, and it's just wild. It just blows my mind what he's
yeah. And I have a lot to say about that one too. But even the other day, he was like, "Hey, I think this supplement's helping me." I'm like, "How many are you taking?" He's like, "I'm taking one." I'm like, "Dude, take more." So, but I do think he's on the right track and seeing some improvement. So I see people like that really, 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 really often. And I would say for him too, and even if he hears this, he knows this. But I'm like, dude, I can't wait for you to get out of your house, because they're in the process of moving. And I can't wait for you to get out of your house, because I think that was amazing. He gets asthma when he goes down in his basement. I'm like, dude, you got to get out of your house.
Yeah, that's like a red flag.
Oh, big time, big time, big time. And I think that, again, I don't think that we're sharing too much, but I think the point is that there's other things besides just COVID or the vaccine or other things, but there's other things that keep somebody stuck or allow somebody to maybe not get well after this. There's also all kinds of studies that I can show, which are crazy. They're super cool. They're COVID studies, but they'll say things like, when COVID first came out, they're like, why are some people doing fine and some people are doing poorly?
Yeah.
There's all kinds of studies that say it's based on your glutathione status and other things, but there's a ton about glutathione. And mold depletes glutathione. Toxins deplete glutathione. Pesticides and heavy metals, they deplete glutathione. And it's not, I see depleted glutathione in teenagers, kids all the time. I mean, who was a kid I was just with that had, I don't know, a lot of kids, it's really common, that will see there's jacked up glutathione markers. But if you lose that antioxidant capacity, then you get an infection and your body just cannot handle it. Whereas other people skate through it with no problem. So there are underlying things. And this is not in the New York Times or the Chicago Tribune or things like that. You got to dive into the medical literature. But when you speak, like I spoke at this seminar for 2 hours, and my slide deck was 92 slides long or something. It was just all studies. And it was just like jaws on the floor of like, oh my gosh, this stuff has been out there since 2020 about like, why are some people getting sick and some others aren't? And then even now with long COVID, some of those mechanisms that are involved with that research is out there, but it is not what you're going to find when you Google it and you read like somebody's blog article of like, here's my long COVID story. You're like, that's me. And then you're going to join that club, which again is going to be counterproductive, as far as actually looking for the root cause and all the different variables. So I'm rambling a little bit, but I think that research is out there, especially with COVID, and COVID's particularly fascinating. I would say for me too, at first, my approach to COVID, I talked about this whole thing in my seminar. That was basically the whole point of it. Was I went through timeline wise. I was like, at first, I completely ignored it. Like, just it kept moving with my life, worried about my focus. We just bought a house and just kept my business going, and just like the world was going crazy, but we just like stayed focused at home. But then it was like this research started coming out, and then I started to get super intrigued because I'm a research guy. It's like, oh, okay, like this is why people are getting sick from it. They don't have glutathione. They don't have this. They don't have that. There's these studies are coming out comparing populations to populations, and when you look at that, which again is not ever shown conventionally or mainstream media or even alternative media, but it is out there in the medical literature, and there are just thousands upon thousands of COVID studies, now, and so it's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's super fascinating, and you know this, but like my parents were some of the first cases to get COVID in the
That
United
cruise
States.
ship was
Yeah,
that cruise
they
ship
were.
was like that was like the first
Yeah,
COVID.
they were on that cruise ship. For listeners that got I don't know, they held it at the port of Oakland, which is
Yeah,
like
like
10 minutes from me.
the first day of COVID. I mean, I think that everybody remembers at least like when that started. There was like a few cases, but remember, everybody, there was one cruise ship that was like off the coast of California. It was like
Yeah.
your parents were on that, and it was like it was really scary for a while for your dad and stuff too.
Well, so they got sent to, once they finally were allowed to dock, people in hazmat suits took them to San Diego to a military base, and my mom got a mild headache, and my dad went to the ICU, and they told me, say goodbye to your dad over FaceTime. He might not make it hours, definitely not days. And somehow he pulled through, but because of that, he got blood clots. Because of that, he lost the ability, or he had strokes. Because of that, he lost the ability to eat. He couldn't eat the last year and a half of his life. But every time they gave him a COVID shot, it was like it set him back like 6 more months. It was just wild. It was so I
Well, there's
died of long
research.
COVID.
If I show all these slides, it's like, oh, shoot, that totally makes sense. But my mentor, my main mentor, two of my main mentors, the authors of this book is one and two of them, or one of them. But my mentor, they put out a paper. It was one of the most widely read papers in all of COVID. It's one of the most widely read papers in the history of scientific literature.
Wow.
Just a massive impact factor and things like that. But it was about how COVID antibodies cross-react with body tissue, like thyroid tissue, mitochondrial tissue, joint tissue, like all these tissues, and they showed that in research. This is before the vaccine, right before it, and they said very politically correctly, you got to walk on eggshells. They were like, we might want to be careful with this as we produce vaccines that are intended to produce COVID antibodies, because that's the purpose of a vaccine, which again makes sense immunologically. Like, hey, if you're going to fight a virus, let's produce antibodies against it. But if those antibodies accidentally bind to self tissue, then you've got an autoimmune disease. And so I've seen people get post COVID with vaccines. I've seen everything, and a lot of times it is crazy. And a lot of times it's neuro stuff. But I've seen wild COVID. Like I saw a 22-year-old, 21-year-old kid get type 1 diabetes after COVID. I've seen people get RA after COVID. Thyroid and all the others, it's maybe harder to say for sure. But some of those are like they started right then, especially the type 1 diabetes. This kid's blood sugar was in the 600s. And he was like a 21-year-old young, healthy kid that worked a landscaping job in Texas and then went to the gym afterward and stuff like that, just like a strapping young man. And all of a sudden his blood sugar is in the 600s. So it's crazy.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
That is crazy. And I like something you said earlier when you were talking about if you do the research on yourself and then you end up on someone's blog and then you end up in these COVID support groups and you go down this spiral and it's all victimization, right? And it's all mindset. And then it just is that never ending cycle where you're telling yourself you're sick, you're staying sick. And I think that's really important.
And it's kind of like chronic fatigue too, that first off you become your diagnosis and then you get this community and you're like, oh, I'm kind of nestled in, comfortable with this community, and everybody else is suffering with me, and it's like all, it's, I first off, I hate that. But it's also, what I was going to say is like chronic fatigue, there's a myriad of causes, and every single person with that diagnosis is completely 100% different. So it's like you read on a blog that somebody else took vitamin B6 and it helped their fatigue, and it's like, okay, you put all your hope into that because it helps somebody else, and then it doesn't help you, and you're more let down and more dejected, and it leads to more hopelessness. And I mean, hopelessness is like, I don't know, an epidemic. And so I just think that those forums can also be really helpful if they lead people to somebody like me, or they lead people to, their next step or their next answer. I do think that's the beauty and the power of the internet, but it's also that group think, and that tribe mentality and that keyboard confidence too, of like, even as we go to like the polarization today of like, it's really easy to get in an argument with somebody on the internet. It's like, that is, I don't know, that's not the place to be spending a lot of your time. But it's also, you can find podcasts like yours, you can find podcasts like mine, you can find all this literature I'm talking about. I didn't go to the library to find it, I found it online. But you got to know how to sift through the stuff and like what's relevant to you, and piecing all these things together. We talked about this when I interviewed you on my podcast, Kris, but it's like, once you read a bunch of books, they all say the same thing. You know what I mean? Like, it's all, and once you read a bunch of science, they all say the same thing. And once you read 1,000 studies, you're like, okay, I have a pretty freaking good idea of how these things work, and it's gut health and detox, really. But there's a million different pieces to each person's puzzle. And so treating each person as an individual is like how we make this progress and success. Whereas on the internet, they might just know that like, hey, this methylation's a piece of my puzzle, or gut health's a piece of my puzzle, but they don't know how they can solve it. So I think it's a double-edged sword, meaning the internet and these groups and things like that. But it can lead to some groupthink and victimhood.
Yeah, and I talk about the same thing so much, not in relation to health so much, but in relation to mindset and cancel culture, which makes me insane, and just your past that you've been through, right? So yeah, I'm not going to go off on that tangent, but I totally am with you, and I can see it being the exact same thing with health when you fall into that victimization.
Now,
And by the way,
luckily
this is
for
why
me,
I just want to say really quick, when you were talking about how like one person upping their vitamin B or whatever solved them, like that's why it's so important to get your labs done, right? Because you're going to see where you're sufficient, where you're insufficient, and then you can balance it out.
And you're going to see what you need.
Yeah.
What you need. Because again, if you spend enough time in the COVID forums, which I see people like this all the time, they come to me with like 30 supplements. And I'm like, why do you take this? Why do you take this? Yeah. But I'm like, what is this for? What is this for? What is this for? Because I heard it could help. Because I heard it could help. Because I heard it could help, or whatever. And they all make sense. But like, what do you need? And what is the order of operations? And like, even let's take school, for example. We all need to learn how to read, write, and do math and do science. But they don't teach it all at once. You go first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and it's very structured, because if you just follow the course, then all of a sudden in ninth grade, trigonometry comes kind of easily. But if you do that in third grade, it's like, hey, that ain't going to work, because you're like doing it out of order. And I always say in first grade, I don't know. My mom would probably be insulted. I don't think you learn that much. The point, or let's say kindergarten, what they want to teach you is like, do you know how to stay in your seat? Do you know how to get in line? Do you know how to raise your hand? Do you know how to just behave?
Not bite the other children.
Yes, because that is all you need to know at that stage. You do not need to know math and science and reading and writing at that stage. You learn a little bit, of course, don't get me wrong, but it's more about like, hey, we're setting you up for success, because if you don't have these foundations, you're going to be completely screwed the rest of the time, and you're not going to succeed.
Yeah, totally. And I know I've been guilty of that. Like when I was trying to fight the infertility thing, I came to you and you're like, you're taking like 60 supplements. Like, and you're like, where'd you hear about all these? I'm like, in these 500 books. And it's like, you use the machine gun thing versus the sniper to me. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because until you actually get your labs done, you don't know what works for you. Okay. So here's a big question that you're probably not going to be able to answer, but if I was listening to this and hearing about all of this, you know, and thinking like, how does someone avoid mold? How does someone avoid airborne toxins? Like, how do I stay healthy in a world where this stuff is everywhere, even in the tap water? Like,
Yeah, I mean,
what do
first
we
off,
do?
for those two things, it's fairly easy. Filter them. Like get a
What?
water filter and
Oh,
get an air filter and filter your air, filter your water. Now, if there's some big thing, like, something in your water or something like in a well, especially more so than municipal as far as a big thing, but then you might have to do some testing and stuff like that, or labs could point to it, but especially the mold. Like I had somebody yesterday who has had sinus infections and they've been really, 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 really bad. And she has not been getting better. And so I'm like, okay, pause. Something's not working. Because in my office, if things aren't getting better, we're like, okay, there's a reason. Let's figure out that reason. And so, long story short, some people, their mold problem is small. Hers was not. And that sucks. She had, luckily, financially, things like that, they're capable of dealing with the problem. But some people aren't. Sometimes that's a big problem. But they had like, their shower was leaking under their floor and had leaked between their walls and between their floor and had been dripping in there forever. And there's like high mold. And so that was dripping down into their guest bedroom. And then like the west side of their house, where all the storms come in, they had it wrapped the house in Tyvek. And so there's just siding on top of block or studs or whatever. So that was all moldy and had been wet and sweaty. So it's been like a Pandora's box. But they, again, have the financial capabilities of dealing with it. And she's like, I feel so much better. And I talked to her like a month ago. So it's not like it had been that long. She's like, I am like just so much better. And they're not even done yet. But that's, again, big things like, but there are also, Kris, varying levels of cost and engagement. So like mold testing plates, you can set them out around your house and whatever grows on them lets you know like a little bit about is there mold. They're $30 for 6 of them. They're dirt cheap. They're super easy. This lady did mold testing plates. That was the first thing she did. It was crazy bad. And so I was like, because I told her, I was like, she's like, we have 25-year-old carpet. We're going to get it out next year. I was like, okay, well, if you want to get rid of your sinus infections, you might need to get that out now. So that she tested it with a plate and it was really bad. Then she had a mold testing person come in and it was even worse. And then they've already got rid of it. And now she's already feeling better. But going back to your question, an air filter, an air purifier. Again, I did touch on this, not to skip the question, but in my most recent podcast with my pediatrician friend, we talk a lot about this: HEPA filters, ionizers, different things like that. I also have different podcasts about how to breathe cleaner air, but really that's the point: is like find the source, remove the source, or if it's just like because I live in the world, we don't sell plastic bubbles. So getting an air purifier, I'm huge on. I've got an air purifier right there. I've got an ionizer right on the other side of the wall. So that's like, I don't know, like a lot of dollars worth of air filtration just like right in my immediate vicinity. Because I take that really, really serious. I think of environment. I think of air is the number one. I think of sunlight and circadian rhythms is number two. Then I think of exercise. Then I think of diet. But breathing cleaner air, filter it. Breathing cleaner water, filter it. Now, also, I would say any filter is better than no filter. But there's always good, better, and best. And like, do you need a $2,000 air purifier? Do you need a whole home water filtration that's like the Mac Daddy, or do you just need like something to clean out the particles? Well, it kind of depends on your sickness level, your budget level, like where you're at with that. But that's another thing that I'm really big on is like there are no cookie cutter answers. What's right for you? And some people are like, hey, I got the budget to do this. I'm like, well, then this is what you need to do. And so they were like, hey, I don't. And I'm like, well, this is what you need to do. So it's just like no matter where somebody's at, I'm like, this is what you need to do. But it's not cookie cutter for every single person.
That makes sense. So what you're saying is just removing yourself from the environment, like meaning like maybe you live in a moldy apartment and you stop renting that and move somewhere else,
Boom.
or so something like that can even help it. But will that have caused enough damage in your body that then you need to address that, or can just
Detoxify.
removing?
Both. In general, I always draw it as a bucket. If the bucket is emptying faster than it's filling, you're going to move in a healthier direction. If it's filling faster than it's emptying, you're going to get sicker. But getting out of the environment stops filling it from the top. But it also might already be full, and then you might need to detoxify. So it's a combo of both, of like the environment from the top and the detoxification at the bottom. Because sometimes the bucket's emptying because you're like, hey, I lived in a moldy house, I moved out, I'm feeling a lot better, but I've still got this, this, and this. And it's like, oh, 3 years from now, you're probably going to feel better, but how can we speed that up? And that comes into things like glutathione, binders, sauna, gut health, whatever the case is. How can we lower the toxic burden is the next thing.
That makes sense. So just trying to like get as much out and get all the good stuff in as you can. And I know we're like coming up on an hour, but you mentioned something that now I have to ask you about that I think is so fascinating when you were talking about all the things that are important to you that you look for or that you want people to focus on. You said sunlight and circadian rhythms before exercise and diet. And I feel like so many people come into these episodes thinking, oh, diet's going to be the number one thing, then exercise, then all this other stuff. So talk to me really quick about sunlight and circadian rhythms.
Sure. Well, I think that first off, that topic has trended a lot higher in the last 5-10 years. I mean, even with like Huberman and things like that. That somebody yesterday, I was like, have you heard of Huberman? They're like, yeah. I was like, oh, so you live in America. But there's a hot topics, Jack Cruz, other people like that. But even their whole conversation was like, this trumps food. And that kind of like ruffled people's feathers, or people were kind of shocked by that. My whole thing is like, air trumps that. But it's a little bit of both. But your circadian rhythms are controlled by your light exposure. And that's the rhythm of your body knowing day and night. So we're all of our bodies, over a third of our genes are controlled by circadian mechanisms. And so there's just a lot of regulation of genetic processes, metabolic processes that happen on a 24-hour clock. Like you wake up in the day and it gets you energized and ready and get going, and then you sleep at night to recover and things like that. And that's tightly regulated, and that can get off track. So shift work or jet lag or things like that can really throw this off. And even shift work is classified as a carcinogen now, or like artificial light at night, which is ALAN. Artificial light at night is a carcinogen. And so those things are starting to be more well known to be associated not only with things like, hey, your sleep's going to get messed up, but also things like cancer and Alzheimer's. Because it's not to say that like, hey, keeping your TV on at night is going to lead to these things, but it's saying, hey, the mechanism is, if you disrupt this mechanism, it's going to cause dysfunction. And if that dysfunction is severe enough, it's going to present itself or as this or that. So that's circadian, that's light exposure. Our bodies are designed to be under natural light. Like even for me, I'm back here in my cave, I'm staring into this like circle light thing. That's not good for my circadian rhythm. Now, it is the nature of the beast. It is also the value of technology that I'm able to connect with you in California. Or I see, I had a patient the other day that's in Dubai, and she's like, this is the best thing about COVID. I can talk to somebody like you. I also wear blue blocking glasses most of the day. I didn't today because I have a light on. But those things you can do, but getting basically real light in the day and avoiding fake light at night is basically the two sides of that coin. Our bodies were not designed to be, to be around fake light at night. Our ancestors, they maybe saw candlelight and firelight, but other than that, they never saw lights. Incandescent lights were invented in 1895, and it was like before that, it was candles. So I think that is something that, again, it's not like I'm not going to watch Thursday Night Football tonight, but I might put blue blocking glasses on, and I might, sleep with an eye mask and then different things like that, or try to get that light exposure. I sit on my front porch every morning. My front porch faces east, and it's like, that's where my kids get on the bus too. So I have a cup of coffee and sit out facing east over the sunrise every single day. Even right now, it'd be 32 degrees out today. I had a beanie on, and I sit outside and like, that's just part of my routine. But I think that's just really, really important because it sets your rhythms of things like hormones and things like thyroid and cortisol and things like that. And also melatonin. Sometimes the night rhythms too are set by the day rhythms. There's not as much you can do at night to boost those rhythms like melatonin. I mean, obviously you can take stuff, but a lot of times the things you do in the day can help your body sleep better at night. So you want energy in the day and sleep at night. And a lot of people, they're flip-flopped with that. They're wired and tired. They're tired all day and they're wired all night. And that's the most important thing. Before you reach for an adrenal supplement, before you do a hormone test, cortisol test, or before you start taking melatonin, it's like, look at your light environment. And that's something I'm just really, really big on. I've got podcasts and YouTube videos. I've got some great ones about that. It's honestly, they're like, I don't know, they're not old. They're probably like 4 years old now because it was a topic that I was really, really into for a time. And you know how it is, you get into something, you learn a lot about it, and then your focus shifts, but you don't forget what you've learned. So it's still something I practice, still something I preach, but I've got a lot of podcasts about that and like different things you can do. Blue blocking glasses, I've tried them all. Red lights, sleep masks, weighted blankets, 10,000 lux lights in the morning. I got a vitamin D lamp. I've got infrared saunas. I've got all these different things. So I just have a lot of experience with these things, even if it's personally. And I just talk through like, hey, this is why you might benefit from this versus this, and bang for the buck, or like, hey, if the sauna's in your budget, get a sauna. But otherwise, what if you get a $150 red light or whatever it is? There's a lot of different ways to target this.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny. It's like Shane and I have all these things that we've talked about, right? We have water filters, we have air purifiers, we use blue blocking glasses, we have red lights, we have natural cleaners, we have eye masks. But it's like, and someone listening who's just starting on this journey might think that that's really overwhelming, but it just becomes second nature.
And it's just like, the stuff just like accumulates. It's like,
I know.
It's like, I'm a skier. I'm a big skier, as you mentioned. And like, it seems insane when you walk into my garage, like, why does this dude need 8 pairs of skis? And it's not like I bought all 8 at once. They just accumulate. So it's like, my wife is like, maybe they shouldn't accumulate, but they just accumulate. They get worn out and things like that too. Or like, I own a few guns, and it's like the skis at least get worn out. But it's just like stuff accumulates if that's something that if that's a hobby of yours, or if that's if you hunt or things like that. It's just like things start accumulating. And wellness is a hobby of mine, so I got so many freaking gadgets, it's unbelievable. But I also know how and when to use them. And I would say too, Kris, I'm like a wellness carpenter. If a carpenter comes to your house, they're going to have a big toolbox full of tools, but they're not going to use them all for your project. They're going to use whatever they need for your project, but they know how to use them all, and they know how to do any project that you put in front of them if they're really good. And the more experience that they get, the more good they get with those tools, and when to use which one to get the best outcome. So there's all these different tools that we use, and that's kind of my expertise too, is just knowing like, hey man, you're using the screwdriver and you need to be using the drill.
Yeah, totally. And if you're listening and you're like, I don't want to accumulate all these things,
yeah.
Sitting outside, like we just moved and we're building a fence, and I can't wait, because usually part of my morning routine is like putting on as little clothing as possible, sometimes like no clothing, and sitting out and getting red light in the morning in the sun, like while I drink my coffee, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's like you don't need like a red light lamp to do that. And one other statistic I just recently heard when we're talking about circadian rhythms, I heard that every time there's daylight savings, heart attacks decrease by 25%. And then every time in the fall, when we lose that hour, heart attacks increase by 25%. So this is no joke. Like, it can really, really affect you.
Yeah. Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah. I just read that the other day when I wish they would just get rid of it. It's so stupid.
Yeah. I don't mind it, but I don't understand that, because you don't lose an hour. They just shift it, but it's still the same day. But that is interesting, and I just wonder what the other variables are of like what else is going on in the fall. But I believe it. I mean, it makes sense.
I think it was for like farmers back in the day, or something that's like doesn't. But the annoying thing is that some other countries don't have it. Some other countries have it.
Some people in America don't have it.
States, yeah, exactly. Like Arizona doesn't do it.
Yeah, Indiana's weird about it because it totally depends on where you fall on the timeline lines and things like that, or time zone lines and things like that. But I don't mind it because I like it. It's like a interesting change of pace. I think that in the winter, right when things are getting shorter, then you get an extra hour of daylight in the morning. I mean, early morning sunlight. It gets darker earlier, but right when I'm missing that early morning sunlight, and it's like, oh, it's starting to fade. Then it's like, okay, now it shifts back. So I just like it as a change of pace, but I'm sure it's not a healthy thing. I mean, it's certainly not a natural thing. The natural thing would be ditching your watch and your calendar and just like existing.
Yeah.
But I'm just personally not opposed to it, but I'm sure it's not that healthy.
I just saw some meme that was like, if we had 13 months in the year, every month would be 28 weeks, and every single month would start on a Monday and end on a Sunday.
Yeah, and it
like,
was all
why
perfect.
the fuck
It was
not?
yeah.
It's so stupid. I don't know if you like ever, there's like a Nate Bargatze, he just hosted SNL. I like never watch SNL anymore, but he did this like amazing skit, I'll send it to you after, where he's like George Washington, and he's like,
Oh yeah,
I'm imagining a country where we use like we don't use the metric system, and like and it's just like talking about how ridiculous it is, and it's
like,
just,
how many feet will be in a mile? And he's like 5,280.
yeah,
like, okay,
because that's a number everyone will remember.
yeah.
Yeah, no.
Somebody said that to me. They sent it to me twice too, so they must have like they wanted me to see it because they sent it to me and then I didn't say anything and then they sent it to me again.
I was dying laughing though. It's so good.
Yeah,
They're like asking questions. He's like, no one knows. Yeah, it's silly. Awesome. Well, is there anything you want to leave people with that we didn't cover? Like any last minute advice or anything before I?
No, not really. I mean, I think that just tying back to your podcast, Kris, and just kind of everybody that's listening to this, all this starts with your mindset. And I don't mean like, I don't know, even I just mean like if your mindset is that you're seeking answers, then you're gonna find them. If your mindset is that you're accepting things that and you're complaining about them or things like that, then that's gonna be your outcome. So you get what you're seeking, I think, and you get what you're looking for. And if you're looking for, you don't always get it at the pace you want it. Especially when people are sick, they want to get well real quick. But sometimes that takes years of trying. And the people that are digging, like I always say, everybody that I come to is in a hole of some sort. Some people, and very rarely in my practice, but let's say everybody in the world is like, something like, who pushed me in here? Was it COVID? Like, whose fault was it? Like, instead of responsibility, it's like, somebody else pushed me down here, blah, blah, blah. Like, who could I blame? Whereas other people are like, hey, no matter what caused me to be down here, how do I get out?
Yeah.
And they're just crawling to get out. And I'm like, hey, those are the ones that I want to work with. Because otherwise, or the other metaphor, same metaphor, but it's like, I only got so much room in my lifeboat. And my job is to save drowning people. So if I'm throwing out the life thing and you're not swimming towards it, goodbye. I'm moving on to the next person. And some people are swimming like crazy, and that's no diss to the other people. I love them just as much. And they're all three the same metaphors. I have to keep changing it, but the other one, they're all great. I use this one a lot too. If the hotel is on fire, if I knock on your door and you're in 201, if you don't wake up, see ya. I'm moving on to 202, and I'm knocking on all the doors. So it's like if you're not seeking your own answers, then you're not going to find them. And it's not my job. I've learned this the hard way because I've learned too that I see so many people that I'm like, hey, I could really help you. But if you're not asking for my help, then that's not my role. So I don't like go up to people and be like, hey, you could do this. Hey, you could do that. That's first off, that's really, 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 really annoying. Unsolicited advice is like one of the worst things. Some people need a lot of help, but if they're not coming to you for help, then guess what? They're not ready for help and they're not looking for it, and you're going to waste your energy if you're a helper or you're a healer. But there's a lot of people out there that need it and they're seeking it and they want it and they're looking for it, and that all starts with your mindset of like how hard are you trying to solve this problem.
I mean, like I said before, I couldn't agree more, and I've gone on my own tangents about this on this show and on social media, where like you can't help people who don't want to be helped. And when people become it's become trendy to be a victim these days, especially with social media. And when people fall into that, when it becomes their identity, they find comfort in that, right? They have perceived benefits to playing the victim, right?
Yeah.
They get to be the martyr, they get attention.
Yes. Or even with, not to bring this up, but like the pronoun thing, it's like, I'm not trying to offend you. But you know what I mean? Everyone's offended by these things like, oh, you didn't call me the right name. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I had no idea. No one's trying to offend you, but you make it personal with these things. So anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I don't know if you've ever read the Four Agreements, but it's one of my favorite books. And like one of the Four Agreements is never take anything personally, because what other people say and do has nothing to do with you,
Exactly.
but
Yeah.
you make it about you.
Yes, exactly. And
So,
yes, you still want to be respectful, of course, to everybody, but sometimes we just like, we want to be hurt. We want to be a victim because then it allows us to be that victim even more. And people get kind of addicted to that, like, well, you offended me and you offended me and you offended me. And it's like, well, maybe it's you.
and like you said, they get sucked into groupthink then, right?
Yes,
Because there's other
yes.
people that are like, yes, you're a victim. And then they're like, yes, I'm a victim. And we can all talk about how we're a victim together. And then we can fight these causes that make us a victim. But by the way, like taking no accountability or responsibility for our own healing.
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah. Anyway,
Boom.
we could, yeah.
Mic drop.
Awesome. So tell people how they can find you, how they can work with you, how they can listen to you, all the things.
Find me on the Autoimmune Doc podcast. That's my podcast name. So anywhere podcasts are found, not YouTube, but Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, of course. And that's my podcast. You can find me on Instagram. We have like a Facebook and stuff. I don't know because I don't use Facebook, but I think we have one and stuff. But you can find me on Instagram as my best channel. I do have an extensive YouTube channel as well. That's called Washington Wellness Center. But even if you find me on Instagram at Autoimmune Doc, then you can link to all these other things. I can see why you need your fence in your backyard. I just saw someone walking by. It's like, but yeah, so
park back there.
Yeah, so that you don't want to be sitting out there like scantily clad, getting your morning sunlight, probably. But those are the places you can find me. Yeah, and I'm sure you put maybe links in the show notes and things. But the website, the podcast, the YouTube, those are my go-tos. I don't do stuff all that often, but there's an archive of, in my opinion, different gems throughout the years. And a lot of people that come to me, they're like, hey, over the last year, I've listened to every single one of your podcasts and watched every single one of your YouTubes, and I want to work with you really well. Like, I know that you're the person for me, or things like that. So a lot of times that's how people gain some trust in me as well, is by listening just to me talk and kind of, I don't know, go from there.
Yeah, and he's being humble. His podcast and his YouTube channel are just invaluable resources for anything autoimmune, anything mold related, anything gut related. So if you have, I've sent so many people that way. So if there's something that you want to learn about, it's probably a topic that Taylor's covered. So
yeah, and it's deep. I mean, it's not in a bad way, but it's like, if you want to know a little bit more about basically the stuff we talked about today, there's a ton on there about toxins, gut health, studies, case reviews, whatever the case is. But again, I don't put stuff out there that often, but just throughout the years, it accumulates, kind of like skis. And so there's all this. Now it's a great archive. And then what we do in practice is I'll send people like, hey, you need to listen to this podcast and this YouTube video and read this down, and so we can build out a customized curriculum for people based on their situation, not the others.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate you. I know you're busy. I appreciate you taking the time. And everyone, go check out the links in the show notes to find all the ways you can get in touch with Taylor. And check out the links in the show notes to figure out all the ways you can get in touch with me too. Check out my book, Change Your Mind to Change Your Reality. It's available in paperback, ebook, audiobook. Got lots of great stuff on my website, some for free. So check it out. And I will see you all next time. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
Nice. Thanks, Kris. Thanks for having me on.